And so while people are joining, I'll just go ahead and quickly introduce myself and also have my colleague Molly introduce herself. And then also we have one of the researchers that we've been working with, Ben, here as well. So we'll do quick introductions and then go ahead and get started. So my name is Lynn Walsh. I'm the Assistant Director at Trusting News, and I've been spearheading the work that we are working on related to AI at Trusting News. And so what I'm going to share with you today is the results of the first cohort that we did with newsrooms, where we basically are at Trusting News, we are very curious about how users are going to respond to and react to the use of AI. And so, what I'm going to share with you is what newsrooms actually ask their audience about AI and what recommendations are coming out of that. I'm based in San Diego and I'm just excited to share this work with you. Molly?
Hi all, I'm Molly Muchna. I am the project manager with Trusting News, and I will be moderating the chat today. So please feel free, as Lynn said, we'll have time at the end for questions. And so feel free to stick those in the chat, and I'll make sure that those get to both Lynn and our research partner, Benjamin Toff, who will have introduce himself next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Benjamin Toff. I'm a associate professor at the Hubbard School of Journalism and Mass Communication here at the University of Minnesota. And I'm also the director of the Minnesota Journalism Center. And I'm excited to be joining you to talk about some of the research that I've been doing together with Lynn and Trusting News.
Great. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen here. You should be seeing it. So I am going to also be sharing slides. Again, please feel free to use the chat to ask questions, put comments in. As Molly said, she's going to be monitoring that. Will interrupt me if there's anything that's urgent, but otherwise also I'll save some time to address some of those at the end. So if you're not familiar, at Trusting News, what we do is we are trying to help journalists rebuild trust with their audiences. Primarily, how we do that is by using research-backed, tested strategies to see how they work in the public and how the public is responding to them once they're there out in the wild, if you will. We then continue to change those strategies, make them better, and share what we are learning into different materials like trust kits, webinars like this, in our weekly newsletter. And so we've been doing this since 2016. And again, related to AI, what we are really curious about is one, we know that journalists are going to be using AI. So the question is, what does the public think about journalists' use of AI? So very quickly, first, I want to do just kind of a very quick overview of what people think of AI. And this is based on research that's been done not by us at Trusting News, but by other people in the industry, including Benjamin, who is there in one of the photos, who did some research with Pointer. I'm going to be highlighting some highlights from research that Reuters has done and also Ipsos and BBC. I will share these slides, and in these, when I share the slides, there are links to all of this research if you want to dive a little bit deeper. But very broadly, from the research that has been done, some overview of what we know. We know that for the most part, there is widespread awareness of AI. Most people are aware of ChatGPT, and that is actually the one that people are most familiar with. And when you look at kind of audience awareness, who has used it the most, probably not surprising, but younger audiences have used it more. The other thing I want to say about this research is, while some of it is US based, actually the Reuters research that I'm highlighting was done with 6 countries internationally, and then the Ipsos was done with the BBC. So we're talking international audiences and here in the US. So one key point that I want to highlight that has come out of the research that's been done, much of the public already assumes that journalists are already using AI. So this is something to keep in mind, because if you are not using AI, it might be an opportunity to explain why you aren't. But most people are assuming that journalists are using AI. And when it comes to journalists and news organizations using AI, people say that they are more comfortable with that use of AI if there is human involvement. And so the more human involvement, that tends to lend itself to more comfort level with the use of it. And people tend to be more comfortable with AI when it is used with text and stories versus images. And then also the type of content we're talking about matters. So people tend to say that they are more comfortable with AI when it is used for content like fashion or entertainment versus politics. Some concerns that have come out of the idea of journalists using AI, and this came out of a lot of the focus groups that Benjamin did with Pointer. People are concerned and have raised questions like, is using AI cheating? They're concerned that journalists might use it irresponsibly. They're also concerned that AI will lead to misinformation, and they are very concerned that it'll lead to job loss within the industry. Another key takeaway is that people say that they want disclosures and transparency around the use of AI. So that's very, very broad kind of a summary of what we know from other research that's been done. This is a particular part that came out of the Reuters research, and I'm sharing it because what this shows is basically they asked people, what do you think the impact will be on different areas, including healthcare, science, retailers, government, political parties, social media? What impact do you think AI will have on these different sectors? And then, what do you think the likelihood of it to be used irresponsibly within these sectors is? And so that's what this graph shows. And so you can see when it comes to healthcare and science, people said, we think it'll have great impact. They weren't as concerned that it will be used irresponsibly. Now, when you look at government and political parties, they thought it would have a lesser impact, but they were concerned that it would be used irresponsibly. What's really important to point out here when it comes to social media and questions around news media, people say that they do think it's going to have a greater impact. AI will have a greater impact than maybe some other sectors. They also are more concerned that it will be used irresponsibly or there's an opportunity for it to be used irresponsibly. So that is how kind of the public is thinking about AI when it comes to journalism, when it comes to use by news organizations. How does that then relate and combine with what people think of news? Well, from research, we know trust is low. The likelihood of someone trusting in news depends on and varies greatly depending on their age, political affiliation, country they are from, what kind of news we're talking about. One thing we do know when it comes to trust in news is that when people don't know how journalism operates, they don't give us the benefit of the doubt. What that means is people are often making assumptions about why we do things, why we make decisions, how we do our jobs, and generally those assumptions are negative. This is really important when we think about the assumptions people are making about AI and their feelings about AI. Now imagine combining that with what they think about journalism. So if they don't have high thoughts about AI or they have concerns about AI being used, and they already don't trust in journalism, that's what at Trusting News, when we see these two things come together, we are concerned that this may make the problem of trust, the number of people who trust in news, just get even worse. So that's why we want to try to use strategies that we have at Trusting News that we know can help rebuild trust and bring that to the use of AI and not kind of lead to an issue where trust is already low. Now we're using AI, and it could go even lower. We think there's an opportunity to actually use the use of AI to not decrease trust and to maybe potentially build trust. And so, how we want to do that is at Trusting News, our three main strategies are transparency, engagement, and humility. Today, I'm going to be talking a lot about engagement and transparency. But the idea is we know from the strategies that we've tested, when newsrooms get on the record about how they operate, their decision making, that is something that can lead to trust. We also know that when journalists engage with their communities, talk to them, get to know what kind of coverage they want, what problems they have, that engagement, that listening, and then act on what they're hearing, that can help build trust. We also know that if there's some humility in all of this, that we are willing to talk to diverse audiences. We're willing to explain where we might be making mistakes. That humility can also lead to trust or rebuild trust. So with the engagement part, that's the first thing that we did when we wanted to look at If we want to look at AI and use it as an opportunity to not lose trust, but to potentially build trust, we first want to see what do news consumers, and we did this here in the US, what do news consumers in the US think about AI? And so we had 10 newsroom partners. Some of them were local news organizations, some of them were national and international news organizations. But we recruited them to do two things. We asked them first to put out a public facing survey to ask their audiences about their thoughts about AI. What do you think about journalists using AI? When do you want them to be transparent? How transparent should they be? And I'll go over some of those questions in more detail. But that was the first thing they did. Then we also asked them to interview 10 of their news consumers. We provided an interview guide with suggested questions, but the idea was to get in depth with 10 news consumers in their communities to find out what they think about AI and journalists using AI. Now, we took this approach because remember, as I mentioned, mistrust is often about misassumptions. People do not know how journalists operate, and why should they? We haven't been super transparent about it, and we aren't always transparent about it, right? So when they don't know how journalism operates, they don't know how we do our jobs, they make assumptions. Generally, those assumptions are negative, lead them to make up their mind that we are doing something because we have an agenda, we are biased, whatever that might be. So the idea here is let's see what the communities think about AI. What assumptions are they making? What do they want to see from our use of it? And see if we can act on that. So the first thing was that survey. All of the newsrooms, the 10 newsrooms that participated, had the same questions and the same survey. They shared it out to their audiences through newsletters, on stories that they published. Some also included pop-ups on their website. But the idea was to get to see what news consumers think about the use of AI. And some of the sample questions included, how specific should explanations about your newsroom's use of AI be? Is knowing why we decided to use AI in our reporting process important to you? Would it be useful if our newsroom provided information and tips to help you better understand AI in general? So those are some of the sample questions. We have the whole survey available for you if you want to duplicate this, and I can talk more about that, but we'd love to see you duplicate it. But so here's examples of how the newsrooms shared it and tried to get their news consumers to take the survey. So you can see here the American City Business Journal. They had a pop-up on their website. KXAN, a TV station in Texas, they decided to attach the ask to take a survey with an explanation of what generative AI is. I thought that was a great thing to add to help the audience understand, hey, we're about to ask you questions about this. Here's what it is if you don't know. The Texas Tribune also had a pop-up on their website. The Associated Press put it here under their technology center. And so once the newsroom put that out, they had people complete the survey. We then, with the help of Benjamin and his team, analyzed the data, and I'm going to share with you in a second what we found. The other element of it, too, that we did was this community interview guide. So at Trusting News, again, engagement, listening, we believe that is a foundational principle if you want to build trust with your community. We have helped newsrooms engage with their community through these community interviews, through one-on-one conversations with journalists related to other topics, not just related to AI. We truly believe that journalists can make more informed decisions about what it means to serve the public if they understand the people that they aim to serve. And what better way to do that than to have conversations with your audience? Another point as to why this is important. In the US, most adults have not spoken with or been interviewed by a local journalist. So this is research from Pew, and it basically shows that 21% of US adults have said that they've spoken with or been interviewed by a local journalist. That percentage goes down the less white you are, the younger you are, the less money you make, and the less educated you are. So What that also tells us is that one, we're not talking to a lot of our community. We also are talking to a lot of the same people in our community, people who look the same, who have the same education level, and who make the same amount of money and are the same age. So when we talk about this engagement, it's important to us at Trusting News that news organizations get out of that bubble of who they're normally talking to and take time to talk to everyone in their community, not just the same type of people. When we've done this before, we saw that 86% of the people that were interviewed by journalists one-on-one in conversations said that they felt a sense of trust building with the journalist and or news organization. And almost a third said that they were considering subscribing after that one-on-one conversation. That's huge. So we took that previous work that we've done with community interviews and those one-on-one conversations with newsrooms. We applied that to AI and generative AI. So we created a community interview guide, which again is on our website in a trust kit, and you can use it to do this in your community. And we had the newsrooms go out, pick people to interview, and ask some of these questions. The interviews, for the most part, took 30 minutes, sometimes 15, sometimes a little bit longer. And some of the questions were things like, is there anything you're afraid of when it comes to us using it? When we use AI, what do you want to know about that use? And how important is it to you that a human is still involved in the process if we use AI? So we took those survey responses. We took what the journalists reported back from these interviews, what they heard, and here's a little bit about what we learned and what we are recommending based on those learnings. So first and foremost, how comfortable are people with journalists using AI when it comes to different types of ways that we could use AI? So one of the questions in the survey was, how comfortable are you when it comes to journalists using AI to check spelling and grammar, to transcribe interviews, for language translation, data analysis? And what you will see is that, generally speaking, people are more comfortable when it comes to checking spelling and grammar, transcribing interviews, language translation. All of this definitely reflects and kind of reinforces what earlier research has shown. It kind of is in line with other research that has been done. Now, one thing that is interesting is data analysis. People for this survey, anyways, were not actually super comfortable with journalists using AI for data analysis. And that's something that is a little bit surprising to me. I also think it's worth pointing out because I think it's a way that some journalists could see themselves using AI for and or might already be using AI. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when I share some other data and information around disclosures. But I think what this signals is that if we have audiences that seem to be uncomfortable with the use of data analysis or using AI for data analysis, we should be thinking even more carefully about how we're explaining our use of AI in that case in data analysis to our audience so we can see if that helps them get more comfortable with the use. So some other ways that journalists could use AI and what people said they were comfortable with or not comfortable with. So probably again, not unexpected, but people were more comfortable when it came to when we asked about writing stories. If there's human review, more comfort level. No human review, less comfort level. The same thing when it comes to writing headlines. And then people generally are pretty uncomfortable with using AI for voices or as like an avatar for a newscast. So that was one big takeaway, this comfort level with the use of AI that does reflect pretty closely what other research has shown. This is something that came out of our research that we've been talking about a lot, and I think it's worth pointing out, and there's a lot more to do here because I think this is an opportunity for journalists to use AI to build relationships and potentially build trust with their communities. So more than 80% of the survey respondents said it would be helpful if a newsroom provided information and tips to better understand AI in general and help them detect when AI was used in content creation. So The big takeaway, people want to be educated about AI. They want help understanding this, and they would love for newsrooms to help them do it. We see this as a huge opportunity to engage with your community by either partnering with organizations like a library or maybe a university, holding events where you're explaining how AI works, what it's about. But it can be even more simple than that. Why not host an event and bring people together for coffee or drinks and say, what do you think about AI? How are you using it? Let's kind of brainstorm together. What are people comfortable with? What are you fearful of? As a way to show you are listening and you want to help them better understand this technology that for a lot of people might be something that raises alarm bells and that they might not understand. This is an area that we have not gotten to explore a lot yet, but we really want to help newsrooms educate their communities about AI and engage with them in these kind of community events around better understanding how it works and how to use it. The big takeaway, though, from the research is related to disclosure. This is something that at Trusting News, again, one of our pillars of building trust is that transparency. So we wanted to see, what do people want to know? If journalists are using AI, do they want to know about it? And what do they want to know about that use? 94% of people said they want journalists to disclose their use of AI. I feel like that's loud and clear. They want transparency, they want disclosure. Again, when I've highlighted those kind of research takeaways from other research that's been done, that was something that people found, that other research found. This, again, just reinforces it, and a very high percentage. So when we dug into that a little bit deeper. So not only did people say, yes, we want you to disclose your use of AI, but we asked other questions to try to see, well, how should journalists do that? Because I think that's the big question. When should journalists do it? And so 3 other things that people told us. 87%, again, all of these are pretty high percentages that people said they wanted. People want to know why journalists decided to use AI. They said that would be important. They also said it would be important to know, to understand how journalists will be ethical and accurate, even though they are using AI. They also thought that it would be important to know that a human was involved and reviewed the content before it was published. So we take all of these kind of data points. People say they want disclosures. They say they want to know that you were still ethical and accurate. They say they want to know why, in the first place, you decided to use AI. And they really want to know if a human reviewed the content or not. So knowing all of that, the idea then is, okay, I think the takeaway, we should disclose. Let's disclose. And why? Well, transparency and disclosure, we know from other trust work, we know that this works. Being transparent can help build trust. This is research that we have around explaining things like why you're doing the story, how you're doing the story, just explaining how you cover crime coverage, political coverage, being transparent about that, getting on the record about that, sharing that can help build trust. This is the result of some A/B testing that we did where we showed people a version of a story that did not explain those things, and then a version of the story that did explain those things, was transparent about why they did the story, how they're doing the story, what their approach to covering crime is. What we found is that people who saw the story that had the explanation, that had the transparency language, they said that it helped them feel that that story was more credible, had more integrity, was more transparent, more reliable, more accurate, that it told the whole story. So this is where we say transparency can help you be trusted, have a better reputation, be thought of as fair. And so we're taking that and thinking, how can we apply that to what people said they want transparency of AI? Now, the good news is this transparency also works on air. So if you are someone who produces video content, even content on social media or radio, we also know that that transparency language can help build trust. And we did this research with WCPO, a TV station in Cincinnati, Ohio. And what we found is that when trust language was added to local TV news stories, people said that they felt that that version of the story that had the trust language was more personal, it provided more facts, and more context. And they generally overall just felt that the story was more complete. So the takeaway here then is people say they want disclosure if we use AI. They've told us a little bit about what they want. We know transparency works. So now our next move after getting this at Trusting News is, okay, let's make recommendations about what a disclosure should look like. If I'm a newsroom, I'm using AI to transcribe interviews, maybe to write a headline. Now, what do I do? People say they want to know about it. How should I write that? So what we are recommending is that if you are using AI, you should disclose that use. And if you're doing that, things you should think about including, and we'd recommend including, is information about what the AI tool did, explaining why you used AI, and ideally, language that shows how that use of AI benefited the community or will benefit the community, or is improving or enhancing your news coverage for them or in general. Also, if humans touched it in any way, edited it, reviewed it, say that. That's something people want to know. And then the other thing is they really are concerned that if you're using AI, are you still upholding that content to the same ethical standard? Is it still meeting your newsroom editorial standards? Is it still accurate? Ideally, it is. You have different processes in place to make sure that all of those things are true. So include that and say that in the disclosure. Now, you may be thinking, okay, that is a lot to write in a disclosure. And it may seem like that. And you could go on probably for a couple paragraphs to explain that and include these things. But you don't have to. What we have created is this kind of fill in the blank, Mad Lib style disclosure that you can use that includes all of these elements. We have this available on a trust kit on our website, which I will share, and I'm sure Molly has already probably shared a link in the chat. But the idea is that you can answer all of these questions, include this information in just a couple sentences. You can see here in the example that we have, it's pretty simple. In this story, we used, and you say what you used, to help us. What did it do? When using this, we fact checked, made sure it met our ethical standards, whatever that was, whatever you did, that's that human accuracy element. And then why? Why did you use it? Using this allowed us to go more in depth, provide more content. There are lots of different ways that this could be written and this could be filled in, but it has these main elements in it. We also have different examples written out about what this looks like in different use cases. So if you used it to transcribe interviews, here's an example of what that could look like if you use that fill in the blank style disclosure statement. Maybe you used it to analyze data or help you collect records. Well, we have an example of that. And again, this could be done hundreds, probably more than that, thousands of different ways that you could say this. And what we are curious about is how much does language matter? And I'm going to talk a little bit about that because we're still testing that, but we do have a little bit of research that we want to share with you about that. But first and foremost, the important thing is, can you talk about what you've used, what it did, how you still made sure that it was accurate and met your ethical standards, and why you did it? Those are kind of the main elements. And it actually can fit into 2 or 3 sentences pretty easily. So transcription, analyze data records. We also have it if you're using AI to write content or using it for translation purposes. And again, this all can be changed. You can change different words. You can insert the name of the tool. But the idea is that you can do this in a couple sentences and have it, we think, have it meet your users' needs. We're going to see and want to test more about how effective it is. So I'll talk about that as we talk about next steps. So as I'm sharing these, I've said, there are hundreds of different ways that you could write this. Like, what words are most important? Is using artificial intelligence or AI or the name of the tool? These are all things that we have some answers about, but we're still testing. but we did do some pilot research to kind of get at that a little bit. Basically, the idea is we wanted to see how specific language should be, and like, does it matter if we're saying AI or if we're saying artificial intelligence? And this is work that Benjamin and his team helped us with. And I'll share a couple takeaways from that and then see if Ben wants to add anything to those takeaways. But the first takeaway that we learned is that first and foremost, when it comes to language, so questions about language, one thing we're learning is that specificity matters most. So audiences are responding better to detailed disclosures about how AI is being used in the newsroom compared to generic disclaimers that were viewed less favorably, intended to garner less trust. We also are learning that word choice seems to matter less. Audiences want to know specifically what AI was used to do, but that the words that you're using to describe that or in the description seem less important. And again, this is still pilot research. We're going to dive into this a little bit deeper, but these are some takeaways that I think are important to share if you have a disclosure in front of you that you want to share and you're kind of going over different words and trying to like decide how specific to be. Well, we're learning it's better to be detailed, and word choice doesn't seem to be mattering as much as we may as journalists think. We also know that when you're getting specific about AI's role, it's better to focus on how it improves news quality or the quality of overall experience content over quantity. So what that means is if you're saying, well, this allows for more to be done, content to be created for content's sake, people aren't really, that didn't resonate as well. Now, if you said it allows it for you to do more in depth, or you're kind of broadening that and getting a little more specific, again, that quality over quantity, that was another takeaway. Something else we're learning is that, which again just reinforces the research that has been done, audiences are more comfortable with AI being used for tasks like transcription or translation than for data analysis. So this additional research reinforced what we had learned in the first round of research. And this is kind of despite the enthusiasm among journalists for using AI in investigative or data-heavy reporting, audiences are expressing some hesitation about those uses unless they clearly understand what role AI played in the process. So again, that adds to that want for specificity. And then this idea of should you use AI versus automatic tool? We are finding that referring to AI as AI versus using terms like automatic tool is making kind of little difference in audience perceptions. Ben, is there anything you'd want to add to that or talk specifically to?
Sure. Thank you. I think it was a good overview summary of some of the work we've done so far. I'll just say a little bit for context, a little background about, I've studied trusted news for several years, and my interest in studying AI and trusted news came out of a presentation I was giving on the subject of trusted news, in which somebody in the audience asked me about whether audiences would be more or less trusting of news created with the help of AI. And I didn't really know the answer. I mean, I suspected less trusting based on some of the survey data that we have out there about people's sort of impressions of AI, which tend to be fairly negative. But we didn't really know. And so that led to initially a study I did with a colleague, Felix Simon, who is a research fellow at the University of Oxford, where we did an experiment. We tested what happens when you use stories that are actually generated with the help of AI. The guy actually who asked that question in the audience led a company that created all AI-generated news content for local news sites. And so we used some of their stimulus material in the experiment, and we looked at when you included disclosure about the use of AI, what happened to audience trust. And we found people were less trusting of it when they saw that disclosure. And so we wrote this piece, which I'll put the link to it in the chat. It is behind a paywall, but if you're interested in reading the full article, just shoot me an email. I'm happy to share it with you. But essentially what we found was, yeah, it does reduce trust. And so it's why we refer to it as this dilemma for AI disclosure. But interestingly, people didn't perceive the actual article any less accurate or any more or less biased or unfair. And so there's something about the label, the concept of AI that's sort of triggering people's heuristic for is untrustworthy. But that led to a lot of questions, a lot of discussion about like, well, what form of disclosure? Because we only use one version of it using the language that this company have been using to describe their own tool. And so that's really where partnering with Trusting News has been really exciting, because we're able to look at variation in the way that you talk about using AI, and hopefully to the degree that some of these things are less concerning to audiences, there may be valuable ways of talking about it that are may even build trust rather than decrease it, given that we know much of the public has a pretty limited understanding of what it is that journalists and news organizations are actually doing. I just add one thing on the so this was sort of the first stage of some of that work. On one of the points about the differences in word choice or language not appearing to make a lot of difference, that's of course within reason. We're talking about the point I think is, if you're agonizing over like a specific word that's going to sort of unlock the most trust, it seems to be less about specific words and more about the sort of meaning behind what it is that you're disclosing, and the level of specificity and detail you're providing audiences. That seems to matter much more than slight variations in terms of actual wording. But what I'm really excited about is some of the next steps with this work. The purpose of this first stage really was to kind of look at there you go.
Yeah.
How our audience is responding to these kinds of different approaches to disclosure, but then to actually look at when these disclosures are being made in practice on news stories, like the experiment that I did with Felix, and in practice with actual newsrooms, how do audiences respond? Because that's it's one thing to sort of do this in the abstract, where we ask people like, what do you think about these kinds of phrasing, when they see it in actual news stories with actual news organizations that they may already trust or may not trust. We're really interested to know how that kind of disclosure affects those attitudes at that point.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. And I'm so glad you shared that, because this is actually, so that first research that you did is why I remember I reached out to you and I was like,
Yeah.
can we talk more about this? And can we see, like, I feel like if the disclosures were written better or differently, I think it would make a difference. And the reason I had said that and recommended that, and we kind of started diving into this together and with Trusting News, is again that research around transparency that I shared earlier. We just generally know transparency can help build trust. And so when I saw that initial research, I was like, I feel like if we do it in a different way, will it make a difference? Because audiences say they want it. So is there a way we can do it that will actually help them better understand and that will resonate with them in a way to think, wait, they actually are, this journalist, this news organization is using AI responsibly. So yes, it's not going to decrease my trust at least, and maybe will help build trust. So that's what we want to test and build more. And that's what we've kind of built on. So that first part is, we know people want transparency. We have some recommendations based on what people have said about what they want to see in that transparency in those disclosures. And so, as Ben said, next we're going to actually take those recommendations, take what we've created, the kind of recommendations on the disclosures, the sample language, and we're recruiting newsrooms, which there still is a day and a half to apply if you want to be a part of this. We are going to be selecting 10 newsrooms to try out. Basically, you have to be a newsroom that's using AI regularly in your reporting. So that means you're maybe using it to help with transcriptions, translation, maybe write headlines, write content, help with research, data analysis. It could be any of those things. But if you are a newsroom that's doing that, we would work with you. You can apply, and we would work with you to basically help public-facing disclosure language that you will attach to 10 stories during the cohort period. We then are going to work with Ben and his team to see how our audience is responding to it. And as Ben said, out in the real world, right? This isn't like a hypothetical. This is real news content. What do people think of it when there is that disclosure about AI use attached to it? So if you are interested in helping us with this next round, there is still time to apply. This is not for freelancers. This is really just for newsrooms. And again, have to be using AI regularly enough and be willing to add those public-facing disclosures. Deadline is tomorrow, but there is the date or the link there, and I'm sure Molly's sharing it as well, for you to apply. So there is still time, and I'm glad to take questions. The other thing I will just say when it comes to disclosure and why personally I just myself am very interested in figuring out a way to help journalists be transparent and disclose this use in a way that's going to be helpful to audiences is just from an ethical standpoint, I do think we owe it to our audiences to let them in on our process, which includes sharing if we didn't create the content ourselves. And so I really want to see if we can find a way to do it that can build trust, or at least not lose trust. So that's just something that's for me is important as well. So all of this that I just went over is available in our trust kit on our website. So if you aren't familiar, we have trust kits on a variety of different topics. We actually just launched one today to help you talk about how you are funded and who owns you. So again, being transparent and getting on the record about that. But the idea of a trust kit is that it has all of these resources in it. So if you are someone who's like, I wonder what my audience thinks about AI. Well, guess what? You could use the survey that we have there. It's linked in the trust kit. You also could use the community interview guide to find out, what does your audience think about it? Do they want us to use AI? Are they hesitant? Why are they hesitant? What do they want us to talk about if we do use AI? All those questions can be answered with the help of the survey, the community interview guide, and then we also have that Mad Lib disclosure. So if you are using AI and you want to disclose it, we can help you with some of that sample language. And then in addition, we will be sharing a lot of our work with AI, including what's to come with that next round, that next cohort in research in our Trust Tip newsletter. If you're not already a subscriber, that's the best way to stay up to date with what we're doing related to AI, but trust in general. And then just want to also thank all of this work is possible because of the support from the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation, who is funding this work. And again, a shout out to the newsrooms that helped us with this work, because everything we do, and again, this is why if you are using AI regularly and want to further explore this, please apply. Still have a day and a half, but all of the work we do wouldn't be possible without newsrooms, because we really do like to make sure we take an idea and a strategy and kind of test it with real news consumers and real news content to see how people respond.